Live.
Namaskar and a very good morning. On behalf of the Department of History, R.K.Mission Vidyamandira Belurmat, I welcome you all to the two-day national level webinar on history and heritage of India. The response to this webinar has been very encouraging, with scholars, academicians, students, and those interested in Indian history and heritage participating not only from all over the country but beyond its boundaries. I welcome all of you and thank you for taking time out and being here today as we bring this webinar live from the City of Joy. Today, I have the privilege and honor to welcome our esteemed speakers who are experts in early Indian history and archaeology and fantastic teachers to those who have had the good fortune of being their students. Professor Sucandra Ghosh of the Department of History, Hyderabad University, who will address the meet today, and Professor Vishnupriya Boshat of the Department of Archaeology, University of Calcutta, who would address us tomorrow. So a very warm welcome to you, Professor Ghosh and Professor Boshat. I would now like to welcome Swami Ekachittananda Ji Maharaj, Principal, R.K.Mission Vidyamandira. Joining me today are my colleagues from the Department of History, Professor Gautam Mukhopadhyay, who would be moderating the question and answer session after Professor Ghosh has delivered her lecture. And Professor Nurmahammad will also be joining us, who would deliver today's vote of thanks. However, before I introduce today's speaker, I would request Swami Ekachittananda Ji Maharaj, Principal, R.K.Mission Vidyamandira, to kindly inaugurate the webinar and say a few words to all the participants and viewers.
Om Sahana Bhavatu Sahano Bhunaktu Sahaviryam Karavavahai Tejasvinavadhetamastu ma vidvishavahai. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om. My respect, good wishes and love in due places, especially to Professor Sucandra Ghosh, to Professor Vishnupriya Boshat for the guest lecturers today, to Professor Prithwiraj Biswas, Professor Gautam Mukhopadhyay and other colleagues of the Department of History, and to all my beloved dear students. In particular, actually, I'm very much grateful to Professor Sucandra Ghosh and Professor Vishnupriya Boshat for giving consent to speak on this grand occasion. I say so actually because in Vidyamandira we have got a separate department entitled Indian Cultural Heritage, Spiritual Heritage, and that is looked after by the monastics of the family. To be more precise, actually Swamiji's one of the most favorite subjects was history itself. In course of conversation with his disciple Sharat Chakravarti in Swami Shishya Sangvad, Swamiji maintains, laments actually, that unfortunately in these days we don't find too many youngsters who know of their 7 generations, previous generations, what to speak of the earlier ones. So that was Swamiji's idea, that students should grasp their glorious past first of all, and then try to figure out what their next course of action would be. In the lecture, Future of India, given by Swamiji at Chennai, Swamiji gives his plan of action. Know your past. Out of the past is built the future. Look back, therefore, as far as you can. Drink deep of the eternal fountains that are behind, and after that, look forward, move forward, and make India brighter, greater, much higher than she ever was. So that was the dream of Swamiji, and it is we, students and teachers both, who shared the responsibility of making Swamiji's dream a reality. So, with these three words, I once again extend most hearty and cordial welcome to the guest speakers. Professor Sucandra Ghosh, in her mail, lamented that because of this COVID-19 outbreak, she cannot come to Vidyamandira right now. I do hope and pray to the Holy Trio that once this life becomes normal, she does come to Vidyamandira. We will be very eager to hear from her in the uh, in our Vivekananda Sabhagriha. So, from the virtual to the day-to-day reality, we'll be meeting definitely in someday that is definitely going to come. Once again, I thank you all from on behalf of Vidyamandira family as well as on behalf of the Department of History. Om Shanti 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 Hari Om Tat Sat Shri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.
Thank you, Maharaj, for inaugurating the webinar and for your words. Now, before we go further, I want to review the functionality of the webinar. Dear participants, your active participation is important throughout the session. Right now, we have everyone on mute to avoid background noises that may distract you from listening to the webinar. Throughout the presentation, however, our technical team will be managing the chat functionality. You can enter your questions and comments in the question box throughout the presentation. However, anything deemed inappropriate would be blocked. I would now like to introduce Professor Sucandra Ghosh. Professor Sucandra Ghosh is presently professor in the Department of History, University of Hyderabad. Her interest lies in politico-cultural history of Northwest India, early India's linkages with South Asia, Indian Ocean, Buddhist and trade network. A recipient of several prestigious grants and fellowship to pursue research in London, Paris, Bangkok, among others, she was awarded the Savitri Chandra Shobha Memorial Prize of Indian History Congress in 2017 for a book, From the Oxus to the Indus, a Political and Cultural Study. Apart from innumerable essays published in national and international journals of repute and edited volumes, she is also one of the editors of Inscriptions and Agrarian Issues in Indian History, and area editor of the Encyclopedia of Ancient History, Asia and Africa, published by Willie Blackwell. Today, Professor Ghosh will focus on practices of quotidian life in early Bengal through visual, textual, and material art. As such, it will not be out of place to recollect that the late American anthropologist Gordon W. Hughes had once lamented that the majority of those who attempted to study civilization seemed to prefer the dramatic march of great events and splendid deeds of great men in the political and military spheres, or were preoccupied with grand achievements such as philosophical systems and the fine arts, relations between states, and so on. Clearly, he was not happy with the existing habits of scholarship which neglected the quotidian. Of course, he did not claim that the addition of daily life information would be a magic key to understanding our civilizational systems in some elegant theoretical fashions, but he did stress that the additions of those studies may make such accounts much more interesting. If I'm not mistaken, Professor Ghosh believes in this argument, and her specializations in epigraphy and numismatics and training in early Indian script make her ideally suited to comment on the topic she has chosen to speak. So without further ado, I am signing off with the surety that everyone listening to her today will gain much from her lecture as we observe, absorb, and connect with a historian who uses her skill to weave an account of an era from our past. Thank you. Now I'll invite Professor Sucandra Ghosh to deliver a lecture. Sucandra.
A very good morning to you all, and thank you, Prithwiraj, for that wonderful and generous introduction. I also thank Professor Maharaj Ekachittananda Maharaj for his preliminary remarks and welcoming me so wholeheartedly. I really wish that one day I'll be coming to Belur. And I'm really, indeed, it is a privilege for me to be here today, to be speaking at this webinar introduced by Mission Vidyamandira, Belur. I'm very much a part of this institution as a member of the Board of Studies. And I'd like to mention that though recently I have joined Hyderabad, I'm very much from Calcutta, and I was actually teaching as a faculty member in the Department of Ancient Indian History and Culture, University of Calcutta. Now, the topic on which I'm speaking today, this is actually a recent interest of mine, and this is a section of a joint essay which has been published in the History of Bangladesh, which is co-edited by Abdul Momin Chaudhary and Ranavir Chakravarti. And my co-author is a colleague and a friend from the Department of Ancient Indian History, Shayantoni Pal. What I did is that I'm actually focusing on certain aspects of our sources which deal with the history of the quotidian. So my focus will be mainly on the visuals and the texts. As Prithwiraj actually wished and believed that I'll be focusing on epigraphy, but here I have chose to move away from epigraphy a little bit for two reasons. One, basically, is that if you look at our sources, epigraphy does not provide much of information on this, though there are some. I wouldn't say that there is none, but the most of the information comes from the visual material and the textual sources. I had thought of bringing in a lot of material culture, but considering the time limit, I thought that it is better that I concentrate today mostly on the visuals and the textual narratives from which I can glean some ideas of the everyday life or the practices of the quotidian. I would rather say that whatever material I'm going to show you or I'm going to talk about does not give a full-fledged, full or a whole holistic picture of the quotidian life. As you all know, that it is very difficult to reconstruct a holistic picture from fragmentary evidences. But even then, whatever little we have, it is possible to get some kind of idea of how the people in the past, particularly I'm talking of Bengal, lived in their day-to-day life. My focus today is Bengal, but since I work a lot on Northwest India, so I have looked up the sources in the northwestern part of the Indian subcontinent, and there I have focused mainly on the life of the elites. But here I will be focusing on both the elites and the ordinary people, and I'll come to that later on. Now, as an introductory remark, the first thing that is very important for us to know is that when we talk of social history, it is, of course, encompassing the study of everyday life. Unfortunately, for several years, the practitioners of social history did not focus much on the study of everyday life, even though it had such wonderful exponents like Fernand Braudel, whose structure of everyday life we all know, or even before that, there's a very rich historiography of the study of everyday life. I'm not going into the details of the historiography today because of paucity of time, but I have dealt with this in other essays, and particularly in the essay on the history of Bengal, which is published in the history of Bangladesh. So anybody interested in the rich historiography of this theme can have a look at that essay co-written by me and Shayantoni. The idea of writing the history of the everyday life caught the imagination of historians, and serious academic discussions on everyday life took off from the beginning of the first half of the 20th century. but of late historical inquiries into the everyday life have re-emerged as a distinct subdiscipline within the broader framework of the study of a given society. This is in fact very encouraging, because now a lot of work in India and abroad are being done on this, and we have like very specialized works like languages, how everyday languages molded the society. So this kind of works actually bring a new facets to the study of everyday. We know that Fernand Braudel defined everyday life as constituting or consisting of the little things that one hardly notices in time and space. To put differently, to understand the everydayness, attention to small components is iterative. It's very much needed. For him, as we all know, that every day is a constituent of a long durée. So when we are talking of every day, there is a structure, and it is a long durée time of which we are looking. So here too, in case of Bengal, we'll be looking at length from say 2nd century BC to the early medieval period, but trying to see how the sources give what kind of impression on the day-to-day existence of the people, be it the elites or the quotidian or the community man. To have a general idea on how everyday life has been looked at in the Indian context, we find that in 1816, a voluminous account of the daily life of the Hindus appeared in Hindu Manners, Customs and Ceremonies, which was written by Abbe J. Dubois in 1816. But credit must go to A.L. Basham. In his Wonder That Was India, he had a chapter, Everyday Life, the daily round in city and village. The very title, Daily Round in City and Village, shows that he talks about different aspects of life in a very general manner, and where each and every moment of everyday life or the way everyday life is looked at has not been discussed thoroughly. It was Jeanine Auboer who was the first author who has attempted to study the everyday life of early India, stretching from the 2nd century BC to 700 AD, in her book Daily Life in Ancient India. From as we know, the date has been given. So she has taken this. It was originally written in French, and then it was translated into English. This long period was taken to avoid giving an incomplete impression of daily life in ancient India. So, but interestingly, Auboer's ancient India ended at 700 AD. I'm not going to the details of periodization, but we know that there are different phases which we generally accept: the early historic, the early medieval. So here, when we say of early historic, which generally actually brings ends, for some it is 3rd century CE, or some it is 6th century CE, with the end of the Gupta period, which is also known as the threshold times in the parlance of Ramila Thapar. Now, when we come to Bengal, in case of Bengal, we are truly limited by our sources. It is difficult to fathom what actually happened at that time. But as I mentioned in the introduction, that whatever sources we have in our coffer, we have to try to give an idea of some aspects of the everyday life of the people. So here, our concern is understanding the everyday life in historical times. Another important thing I'll come to later on is the fact that we do not have one single entity called Bengal in that period of time. Bengal was an agglomeration of certain subregions. And these subregions had their distinctive variations, and possibilities of changes in terms of temporal and spatial variations are very important that we should keep in mind. So one has to be very sensitive to look at the distinctiveness that permeates all aspects of life in the different subregions of Bengal. For example, Pundra, Rahra, Vanga. These are all subregions and were independent units. And therefore, when we talk of Bengal in general, we are actually talking about a source which belongs to a particular subregion. And in case of the delineation of the subregions, hydrography played a very important role. Now, coming back to the historiography of writing history of everyday life, we have way back in 1949, Niharanjan Rai, who dedicated an independent chapter of his celebrated book Bangalir Itihash Adi Porbo to the daily life of the people of Bengal. He chose various facets of daily life like food, costume, entertainment, traveling modes, etc., to draw an image of the life of the people of Bengal. And it's a very succinct account which gives us a lot of clue to understand the life that people lived at that point of time. Another important work on particularly focusing on the daily life of the Pala Empire was by Shahana Hussain. She has looked at a lot on the art historical remains and the material remains unearthed in the sites of Paharpur, Mahastangar, Manamati, and Nalanda. But her account is very descriptive, and therefore we do not find the kind of work that has been done in the context of daily life in the works of other historians like Brodel and the likes. As I mentioned in the beginning, that paucity of sources is an obstacle. And then the second question that comes again is, when we are talking about the life of a person, whose life is visible in our sources? Whose lives gain visibility? Life of the elites or the common man? And here, like as I mentioned, that I work also in Northwest India. And while I was looking at the sources in Northwest India, I found that particularly Gandhara and his amphirons, I found that we have only the life of the elites to fall back upon. For our sources, talk only the life of the elites and the Hellenistic influence that that particular region had on the life of this important group. Here again, in case of Bengal, we have both. We have evidences from the life of the upper echelons of the society, as well as we have depictions in visuals or in text of the life of a common man. Now the question is, if we talk of common man, again there's a problem. Common man is not a blanket category. So when, for example, when we are talking about the life of an agriculturist, who is definitely a common man, or the life of a boatman, we won't find the same set of chores the boatman is doing every day or the agriculture is doing, because their livelihood actually shapes up also their everyday possibilities, everyday roles. So we have to be very careful when we look at our sources, and sifting through these sources, it's quite an task when we have to choose that what are the things that we can actually use for our study of everyday life. Recently, Prashanto Rai, the so famous sociologist, he's written a book and also an essay which calls Prottoho. And he argues that studies on everyday must not be exhausted by an exclusive attention to the people in the lower depth. This actually comes from the fact that there has been a lot of critique in the context of that when we are talking of everyday, why are we talking of only the upper echelons of the society? It is important that we should bring in the people of the lower rungs of the society, or the ordinary man, and we can find the ordinary in the extraordinary. But he says, and I totally agree with him when I was looking for my sources, that every day in the upper sphere deserves as much attention, considering the fact that our sources, written sources, mostly relate to and emanate from the elite circle. So here, as I mentioned, I will privilege not only the elites or the non-elites. I will talk about the life of the elites as well of the non-elites that we watch. The point is, whatever we are getting from the sources. So here the sources will speak for us. This is just to give an idea of West Bengal and Bangladesh. This map was basically taken from B.M. Morrison's book, and it has been restructured by my colleague in the archaeology department of Calcutta University, Rajat Shannal. So here, if we look, we have different kinds of subregions. For example, you have Pundrabardhana, then we have Varendra is within a part of Pundrabardhana. We have Shamotato, Horikelo in southeastern Bangladesh. Then we have the Banga region. So these are the different subregions which we're talking about. And today I will concentrate mainly on two places. Basically, it is Chandrakitugarh, which has a very rich visual repertoire as well as material culture. I'll take recourse to Chandrakitugarh and Tamralipti for giving us an idea of the visual culture. Now, when we look at, try to look at the everyday life, our entry point is the house and the household. For an understanding of everyday life, it is imperative that we take into account the household, which is a crucial space within which much of the daily activities take place. How did this crucial space look like? We have some fragmentary idea in this regard from excavations or some vague descriptions in texts or just reference to some components of a house in one of the epigraphs. Thus, here we are not delving deep into this, but shall limit ourselves to examples from three genres of sources of disparate period. From Chandrakitugarh, we have houses built of wood, bamboo and tiles with mud walls on the mud plains. These are the visuals that we find. Excavations from Bangar, Mahastangar, Tamralipta give us sparse idea of the dwelling space, where it was perhaps like Chandrakitugarh from mud to brick. In a much later time, we have the Bhatera copperplate inscription of Govinda Keshavadeva. This is the Sylhet region, the present-day Srihatta region, where in 1149 and as dated in 1149, which refers to dwelling sites, basti, outside house, varagriha, houses, griha, kitchen, pakadite griha. And this is very interesting. Like we have this term even in Assam region or in Bangladesh, the kitchen is known as Pakghar. So this Pakghar comes from the Sanskrit word Pakadite Griha. Then we have cowshed, that is Gograha. So these, then we have shops also, Hotya Griha. So this whole depiction of the different dwelling sites, the outside Griha houses, gives us an idea of the living space or the space where the people encountered or interacted in their daily life. We have in the textual sources texts like Shubhashita Ratnakosh and Shodukti Karnamrita give us which give us vivid descriptions of the layout of the residences of the people. The elite house had several rooms and courtyard. We have description of a woman coming to the center of the house and then to the front hall and then stepping out to the courtyard, thus giving a picturesque view of the physical components of a contemporary household. So you can see that how step by step one is actually moving from the inner space, the domestic space, to the out courtyard, and how the rooms were organized in that sort of layout of the residences of obviously the elites. So it can be easily comprehended that the well-to-do sections built big houses with well laid out courtyards and gardens. A contrast is found in the Chorjagiti. I will be using, for the common people, I will be using a lot of material from Chorjagiti. And as it is, we all know that Charjabadha is a very important, significant text which was composed between the 10th to the 12th centuries. And these are a collection of 4 manuscripts written in different languages like Apabhrangsha, Prakrit. Those who are from Bengal, they know much about Charjapada or Charjagiti. And but it is a local form of Magadhi Apabhrangsha, which was used by the common man in Bengal. And we have lot of interesting evidence, interesting moments in the Charjagiti, which I'll be discussing later on, which gives us an insight into the everyday life of not too well-to-do person. So here we find that in the Chorja songs, the domestic units were quite austere and were located either on a hilltop. We have this expression, talot mor ghar nahi paraveshi, where there were no neighbors, or on the fringes of a settled society. So it is a very poignant depiction of seclusion and marginality. Interesting that this tally well with a much earlier injunction of Manu, where it is said that the lower communities, he talks about the Chandalas also here, should live by memorial trees and in cemeteries, hills and groves, which means in solitary and excluded places. In recent researches, the study of the household reflecting upon different categories connects to daily life also. One has to recognize the different coexisting patterns of household. Though our texts mostly acquaint us with the household of the higher Varna or the elite, yet implicit discussion on the lower Varnas in those texts could point to some extent the daily activities or pattern of living of a Shudra. So we find that in Manusmriti, the Vedic Orthodox views could be used, represents the Vedic Orthodox views, and there also we have an understanding of the performance of daily rituals upholding Vedic ideology. I'm bringing this normative text here because though I'm talking of Bengal, in general, these were the common practices that was followed perhaps throughout the subcontinent, throughout where Brahmanical uh, mode of life was dominant. So we have that within the domestic rites, there are certain obligatory rituals which are performed on a daily basis and which comes within the purview of daily life, such as Pancha Mahayogya. Then, and interestingly, these five great daily observances are termed as Nitya, supposed to be performed by the householders. It is opposite to Anitya, so it is a regular. Manusmriti specifies various rituals which are supposed to be performed by the householder on a regular basis. The everyday routine of the householder includes the performance of these five great sacrifices. The Panchamahayagya actually included studying of the sacred texts, offering water to the patrilineal ancestors, making offerings to the gods, to all beings, and extending hospitality. The Charjagiti also gives us some description, but before that, let us see what the Grija Shustra has to tell us. The description of the household and its daily activities in the Grija Sutras project the Griha as a sacred space by focusing on rituals that are to be performed in the household. The everyday rituals of the household attempt to create an aura about everyday common events by according them with some kind of sacrality. The setting of the rites, the time of the year, the time of the day, the presence of participants, the physical aspects of the day, the sacrificial appendages used, etc., convey different anxieties. And that the Shudra households too were sites of rituals where Brahmanas officiated is known from Manusmriti itself. When Manusmriti condemns the Brahmana who performs there, he says that it's a disgrace for the Brahmana who goes and performs the Panchamahayagya or the puja in a Shudra household. From this, we will move into a section which talks about conjugality and sexuality. Because when we look at houses, and with that, it is the people who actually habitate that space, to inhabit the space. So it is the man and the woman, and of course the family, which is a part of these large houses that we talk about or that we come to know from our textual sources. And this kind of conjugality is also entwined with sexuality. So here we have lot of evidences from Chandraketugor which offers expressions of conjugality and sexuality. Um, it is represented through depictions of couples who were engaged in amorous dalliance. Sex is very much a part and parcel of everyday life, which could not be bereft of pleasure, and the urban ethos of life is portrayed through these plaques. And what is interesting is that I'll come to that later on briefly, but here when we talk of Chandraketugor, it is very much an urban milieu that comes into focus. And we have this interesting plaque where you can see that the interior of a bedroom is delineated with great care. Thus, while depicting an amorous couple, the picture beneath the bed is can also be something which has to be taken into consideration. Uh, it seems to be portrayal of an urban setting, and placing of a picture beneath the bed could be a common tradition, as many other plaques have similar representations. So these kind of pictures have been found also archaeologically, like decorative features that were found from excavations. So these were very common in the areas of Chandraketugor. Then we find that from Chandraketugor plaques, we have glimpses of a moment in the day which are portrayed. Like when we talk of everyday life, there are different sections. Sometimes we are talking about that what are the different kind of actions that a person does one after the other in the daily course, where we are talking about the Panchamahayogas and other things. But again, a moment in the life of a person is also represented in the visuals. And here I'll share with you two such moments in the life of a person, which are very integral to the study of everyday life. You can see this beautiful plaque from Chandraketugor is datable to 1st and 2nd century CE. We actually have a very interesting book called Eloquent Art, which is edited by Gautam Sengupta and Shima Roy Chaudhary. It is a collection of the Chandraketugor and other materials, terracotta materials that is found in West Bengal and is in the custody of the Museum of the Government of West Bengal. And it gives you a lot of evidence where you can find such very interesting portrayals of moments of life. So here we have a male figure with a pole on his shoulder. The squarish object held by the rope on the two hands hangs from the pole. He wears a loincloth and holds the pole with his left hand. His right hand is raised to the cheek in a thoughtful gesture. You can see that. A female figure bent low holds up a cup. She is offering something to drink. A pot with a spout is seen on the top of the oven. A large storage jar and an oven can be seen in the background. This is actually another oven. So here we have one oven with a pot, something is being cooked, and here there is another oven, and we can see a glimpse of the large storage jar. So this is perhaps a morning scene where the male is almost ready to go out of the house when he is being offered something by the lady. His posture and his legs suggest that he is on the verge of leaving the house. The squarish object is probably a basket which might contain things to sell. So this is definitely the house of a poor common man going out for his morning course. Perhaps he was going to sell something where his wife is offering food. So this is a moment in the life of this person. Then again, we have a depiction, and this is now housed in the Metropolitan Museum of Art, New York, which portrays an elite family. The dignified look of the male with the turban on his head is seated on a high back decorated chair. These high back decorated chairs were also found in the sculptures, other sculptures, and we have representations of pillars. Even pillars with like Corinthian pillars, Ionian pillars are depicted in the art of Chandraketugor. So she is a tall, she's a tall, elegant lady, nicely dressed with an elaborate headgear, as you can see. Below the couple sits their child, equally well dressed and holding a dog by a chain. Two ducks and a monkey, here you have the ducks and a monkey, complete the picture. The affluent household is also evident from an architectural motif of the pavilion, So you have this architectural motif of the pavilion which supports the roof. So this is a contrast to the picture that we show that we saw a moment before. So this is a very relaxed kind of setting of an elite household that we found depicted here. This kind of conjugality in an urban milieu is a dominant motif in Chandrakirtigar. Much later, if we look at these different kinds of plaques from Mathura or Sanghol, we find that the representation of conjugality is very much there, as we have couples, they are sitting on a window, they are watching something, or on a balcony. So their conjugality is very much expressed in Indian art. Now, when we look at the kind of depiction that we find from the Chaudhary, we know that it gives us an idea about love and conjugality. A song talks about the conjugal life of a Shoboro cup. Shoboros are very much depicted in the Chaudhary songs. So here the Shobori is dressed beautifully with peacock feathers and gunja flowers, perhaps to entice her husband. Her dressing leaves an impression of that of the forest dwellers and not even of an agriculturist family. The husband, enticed, is almost mad with passion. Unmato Shoboro, Pagolo Shoboro. And the poem says that the Shoboro laid the bed for the ultimate union with great happiness. Mahasue Sejis Chaili. In such a situation, betel leaf and erica nut with camphor could be the epitome for utmost pleasure. And therefore, we find the use of the expression Mahasuhe Kapuro Khai. Kapuro is Karpura. Now, camphor is a product from Southeast Asia, which may not be easily available to a common Shoboro couple who struggles for daily sustenance. Thus, to consume betel leaf with camphor before conjugal pleasure could be an aspiration of the couple, which is described in the song. Finally, that the night was spent in extreme ecstasy is reflected in the expression Mahasuhe Rati Pohai. This is a beautiful description of conjugality within wedlock, signifying consumption of mind and bliss at the spiritual level. Here it will be good to remember that betel is associated with pleasure, and therefore in the outer room of a Nagaraka, we have betel along with garlands. I have not brought in here the Kama Sutra, which is very well known, and the life of a Nagaraka, which can itself be an independent essay to understand the daily life of a Nagaraka, and which has been studied from all aspects. And there is another reason that since I'm talking particularly of Bengal, the idea of a Nagaraka in the Kama Sutra is from the fact that it perhaps forms a similar kind of idea of the urban milieu, but it will lose the focus that I'm trying to bring in here. So aspects, before I go there is another point of conjugality that can be said, that in other songs of the text too, we have aspects of conjugality. Like marriage could give eternal bliss was recognized. In song 19 of Krishnopadu, we have the depiction of his marriage accompanied by musical instruments such as gongs, padaha, types of small drums, madalo, and the dundubi. Thus, he went to marry with a lot of fanfare. There is a subtle reference to the practice of receiving dowry after marrying a woman of low origin and being degraded in the caste structure. Dombe bibahiya ahiru jam, jautuke kiya anatu dham. In this case, the dowry was not something material, but eternal bliss. What transpires is that marriage, conjugal bliss, and fanfare were also very much present in the society, which was otherwise grappling with utter poverty. To this, one may add the small pleasures of life, which are also beautifully described in the Chaudhary songs. That is, in Song 50, we find that in the house of the Shoboro, cotton flowers have blossomed, and both Shoboro and Shobori have begun to rejoice because Kongurina fruits have ripened and the Shoboro couple drank the juice. The common social practices were used to explain the religious philosophy of the sect to the followers of the sect in Chaudhary, but I am not looking at the philosophical aspect of it. I am looking at the mundane aspect of it, which talks about the life of the Shoboro couple, who is here representing persons from the lower rung of the society. Apart from work, another interesting facet of daily life which could be gleaned from our sources is pastimes, amusements, and sports. Life of an ideal urbane man had moments of amusement and leisure, which included music, sports, cultural and intellectual pursuits, and periodic social get-togethers in the form of picnics or meetings. We have this expression in inscriptions also called samaja in text also, which actually talks about gatherings that people will gather together and enjoy life. The common folk must have also had their own share of amusements as well. From the narrative plaques, we find that it invokes time and again an important social group comprising the musicians. This I have seen also in the Northwest. And from this is a very important characteristic of the early historical sites. We find that musicians with their musical instruments are distinctly visible. They are also found in the monastic sites of Bengal, where you have the terracotta plaques. But today I will not discuss the monastic sites here. Either represented as a part of social occasions or individually, they include drummers, both male and female, harp players, flute players, and dancers. From textual sources too, we get numerous references to musicians and dancers. It appears that though not from the elite group, these musicians or dancers did not also represent the impoverished in the society. Here we'd like to draw attention to a plaque in low relief. It's not of a very high quality from Chandragutigar, datable to the 1st and 2nd century CE. It's a combination of a male and female, there's a male musician and a female dancer. It depicts a male musician playing a harp. You can see the musician here is playing a harp, and here is the dancer. Of singular interest is a rattle in the form of a female drummer, which I'll show. This is kind of the female drummer. These are rattles that have been found. In all the available pieces, she is bejeweled with long hair and plays the drum placed in front of her. So the long hair can be seen here. We have this depiction of the back, and then she plays the hand on the drum. Her vibrant character is apparent from her depiction. Individual male and female dancers in small plaques were also quite popular, though not portrayed with great artistic quality. Importantly, all these were recovered from layers datable between 1st to 3rd century CE, when second urbanization reached its height in the Ganga Valley, and Bengal also had its share of urban experiences in the form of secondary urbanization. So this is also very important, that when we are talking about everyday life, we have to look also at the context. And here particularly we have the urban context, where we can actually try to locate the everyday experience. The vibrancy of trade with agrarian expansion was felt in the sites of Lower Bengal and Chandragutigar, which came up with the largest repertoire objects relating to material culture. There is another plaque which has the theme of a dancer and a human and a male person, and this is from Tilpi, a site in South 24 Paraganas on the river Piali, datable to the 1st century BCE. The plaque depicts, as you can see, a male figure playing a lyre, and he wears a turban, earring, toque, bracelets. They are all generally they are bejeweled and properly dressed. Female figure can be seen dancing to his left. She wears a toque, necklace, and earrings. There's a hut-like structure behind her, which is indicative of a perhaps a rural milieu, but we do not know. But here is the structure. So there are this kind of depictions which give us some idea of the life. From Tilpi itself, we have another plaque like this, where also it is a family scene, where we find that there are male and female personalities playing lyre or some kind of, or harp, not lyre here, it is the harp, a musical instrument. And you can see in the background a part of the house. So this kind of house is not very common in an urban milieu. So here we have a mixture of urban milieu and the rural milieu, That is apparent from the recoveries from Tilpi. This is another depiction of music, dance, and here we have conjugal. It is not of a very high quality, this paper. So what is interesting is that we have different kinds of representations in the texts, which talks about the different kinds of sports. Taponath Chakraborty informs us that a miniature diagram of the Chaturanga board of the game has been recovered at Mainamati in southeastern Bangladesh. And we see that chess and dice were mostly part of the life of the urban men. But other than that, we have depiction of wrestling and equestrian sports. Acrobatics, hunting, etc. were part of everyday pastimes. And therefore, when we look at the monastic sites also, the terracottas in the monastery, we have a lot of evidence which shows an archer or an acrobat. Much later, in Sarbananda's Tikara Sarvasya, mentions 5 different varieties of equestrian sports in 12th century Bengal, namely Poro, needling, swift and uniform movement; Birava, needing steady bridled movement; Redu, needing circular or curved motion; Polina, involving flight to a great distance, following a straight course; and Morja, a kind of hurdle race. So this shows that we have this kind of a equestrian sports also practiced in Bengal. When Taponath Chakraborty talks of Chaturanga, it is found that the popularity of the game in early medieval Bengal is also indicated in a composition of Kanhupada, which mentions the game of Navabala played on 64 squares with pieces called king, thakur, minister, mantra, elephant, gojo, and pawn is bore. Strategies of the game is also indicated by the poet when he describes a pawn opening an elephant attack, a check given by the minister to the opposite king, and ultimate victory. Matio Thakurat Porinibdito. So this is from Charjagiti. Outdoor games which were involved riding on the back of a galloping horse, Godaturogo, or riding on a swiftly moving elephant was a favorite game of the royalty. Thus, in the Koilan copperplate inscription, it has been said that Sridhara Rata, this inscription is datable to the 7th century CE. Sridhara Rato, the king of the Rato dynasty, his body became muscular and he was looking handsome because he engaged in such outdoor games. So some of the terracotta plaques found at Paharpur and Mainamati prove beyond doubt that hunting, wrestling, laborious physical exercises, or performance of difficult physical feats and physical contests like duels between 2 or more persons were favorite pastimes of the common man. And exactly this kind of things we have found from the Northwest also. In a verse by the poet Govardhan Acharya in his Arja Saptashuti, we find an interesting description of a snake charmer making a display of his control over snakes in the presence of household ladies in the open courtyard of a house. So this kind of events, this kind of happenings was very common in the elite society. That is evident from the textual sources. What about the women? Women and sports, I have given the caption, women and sports. And here we have some, particularly one sport which is very typical of Tamralipto, and we'll be talking about that. We have representation in the textual sources. It is said in Dhoyes Pavanoduto that beautiful young women love to sway to and fro, seated on swings in the garden. Dhoe writes that gardening or planting and watering betel nut and other trees and plants in household courtyards and gardens was a favorite pastime of women folk in early Bengal. This of course gives us a picture of an urban milieu. Aquatic sports was a major diversion for the otherwise monotonous life of the women of the royal harem. Manushallasha mentions Shechana Krida, or the game of spraying water on each other, but it is not related directly to Bengal. But Dhoi further states that playful women of the Shumha country would amuse themselves by indulging in swimming and other kind of aquatic sports. In the Dashakumara Chorito, we get an extremely interesting description of a ball game played in a festival called Konduko in the city of Domolipto, that is Tamrolipto. This was played in public by the Shumo princess Kondukavati in order to propitiate the goddess Bindobashini, that is Durga. According to the description, she let it fall to the ground in gentle grace, and as it slowly rose up, bit it down with a tender hand, and after having tossed it up with the back part of her hand, caught it midway as it was falling. Then she lets it fall. She shows her aptitude for the motion of the ball. She kept it fluttering in space like a bird, hitting it alternately with the right hand or left hand. When it soars too high, she controlled it by moving towards it, and finally she brings the ball to its original point and is hugely applauded by the spectators. So this is a beautiful description of Kandukavati playing a ball, that is Kanduka. So in Sanskrit literature, there are abundance of plays, which indicates the popularity of theatre, of these kind of things. Hemachandra also refers to comic dramas about fat men and projecting teeth and others. I'm not going into the details, but I found this very interesting. There is another interesting game that is referred to from Pundravardhana. Actually, it is said that it is Kadamba Juddha, which is another interesting game. It's played with soft balls of the Kadamba flower, and a commentary of the Kama Sutra mentions that in the Pundra country, this was played by sticks and stones. It resembles a kind of a hockey. So this description, of course, is related to an urban context. I will digress a little bit and just give you this description of Pataliputra, which talks about the enjoyment of festivals. This is an early medieval text, festivals and amusements. Thus, the text Ubhaya Abhisharika, written by Vararuchi, says of Pataliputra, due to people's lack of any fear, their constant participation with happy faces in festivals, the graceful wearing of jewels, and the gorgeous decoration of the body with garlands, scents, and fine clothes, their competence in various diverting sports, and for their other well-known qualities, the earth with Pataliputra as a tilaka appears like heaven. So here the text gives us an idea of the social life of the upper class of medieval in India. But what is interesting is that that the earth with Pataliputra as a tilaka appears like heaven. So what is heaven? Heaven is a place where people are smiling, they're wearing beautiful jewelries, nice clothes, and they are participating in different kinds of sports, having fun, festivals. So this kind of an ideal life is being depicted for Pataliputra in a time when Pataliputra was perhaps not the center of attraction, because by that time the political shift has already taken place from Pataliputra to Kannakubja, that is Kannauj. With this, we come to the regular festivals, like kind of celebrations. Activities or occasions which do not happen each day but has a definite structure are also celebrated regularly. This is actually Fernand Brothers' idea. He said that when we are talking of everyday life, it is not always that we talk of what is happening each day. He talks of a structure, we all know. So he said that there are some festivals which occur a particular time in a particular year. So it has a kind of a structure, and that also should be brought into the study of everyday life. And so we are largely talking of the different festivals that dot our calendars at a fixed time. And here we shall focus on the various festivals celebrated in Bengal as gleaned from other sources. These were occasions of mass celebration and were also the chief sources of livelihood for the professional entertainers, amusers, and sportsmen. This is also another very important category of people that we often miss out when we are studying social history. The professional entertainers, the amusers, it's a kind of a showbiz where these people actually take a very important part. And like we have now researchers and scholars working on this kind of entertainment industry in the common parlance. Then we have, when we look at the rural milieu, we have the harvesting, daily scenes of daily harvesting during a particular season, which culminated in the beautiful representation of a harvesting festival depicted in the plaque of Chandraketigarh, which could be dated from the 1st to 3rd century CE. Now, Chandraketugarh gave us many very interesting melange of different moments. For example, we have certain things depicted which are very urbane, but at the same time, we have also some representations of the rural milieu. It was in the crossroads, and where we have a beautiful juxtaposition of the urbane and the rural. This is a typical harvesting scene that we find from Chandraketugarh. And if we look at the sickles, we find that the same sickles continued. So there was a kind of, while there were many changes in the tools and instruments, but a kind of a continuity also can be perceived. And you can see that how intently the people are actually harvesting, like at the work. But with this harvesting scene, we come to a harvest festival. A procession, this is a fragmented plaque, but which give us some idea. A procession led by musicians is portrayed. A bejeweled elephant follows the musicians who are playing on the drum and a long flute. In the background, two men are seen carrying the harvested crop. Here, a seasonal event is being represented, which marks the grandeur and importance of Harvest Festival in a predominantly urban milieu. For a general understanding of the urban scenario, we may cite the Kama Sutra, which mentions different types of gatherings supposed to be attended by the householder. These include seasonal festivities, events and drinking parties, witticism. In the Indian context, again, Kaumadi Mahotshava, Deepavali, Falgunotshava, and Chaitrotshava, all of which were possibly seasonal agrarian festivals, gradually evolved into organized urban festivals. Now, let me move into the urban space of the artists. Very little information, but these information are useful information that we get. Specialized craftspersons, their products and their workshops have figured in the economic historiography, which highlights the importance of artisanal activities as a factor of urbanization. Some craft products and artisans are captured in the visual portrayal of urban life in the terracotta art of Bengal. A few instances may be placed. I'm doing one or two, not much. And we find that here metalworking was also one of the crafts that were practiced, and crucibles found from Chandraketugarh and Tilpi support the statement. We have innumerable coins that were being minted in this region. Then people are also engaged in bead making and other craft works in bone and ivory. So many of the sites had specialized crafts, but in the sense of varied craft production, Chandraketugarh always remained unparalleled. So this is not a very good picture actually, but the intention can be understood from here. So this plaque, which is dated to the 2nd century CE, depicts three artisans, craftsmen engaged in making something. Behind them are stacked a large number of finished products, which perhaps look like bundles of rope. As you can see, stacked one over the other. So it is to be transshipped. It is to be moved from this place to somewhere. So it is an item of trade, or it will go. Jute or coconut being a common plant of Bengal, this scene is quite probable, as this could be either made of jute or coconut. Chandraketugarh, as a riverine port, in all probability transported these bundles to other areas through riverine communications. And we have a lot of pictures of boats that have been found in Chandraketugarh. Just a few words about Chandraketugarh and Tamralipti, because they were the two major nodes in the early historic period, and which attained material prosperity. And so this also marked the presence of the elite class. So women belonging to the upper echelons of society are portrayed in terracotta plaques, which are labeled as lady with attendants by the art historians. What is striking is that the attendant figure is invariably modeled smaller in size than the lady. Here, class differentiation is portrayed not through the attire and dressing, but through size. In fact, the attendants are beautifully depicted with elaborate coiffure and ornaments. So these attendants are a part and parcel of the daily life of the lady, as they help them in their everyday dressing and makeup. Thus, they are seen holding different kinds of things. Here you can see the lady with her attendant, but I have a better picture. So here you can again visualize the lady and her attendants. So how they are dressed up and how they are being represented in the in this historical idioms. Next, very quickly, Sorry, Prithwiraj, how much time do I have? Can you hear me? How much time do I have? Okay. Now I'll just quickly go into the food habits as a glitch from texts in from Bengal. What is important is that as the daily diets can be suggested only tentatively, we cannot say what was the dietary plans, were the dietary restrictions, dietary habits. We know very little or practically nothing about the culinary art of early Bengal. Food is not merely an edible, and eating is not only a biological process of consumption. So, dietary practices are an integral part of our culture, particularly because of the continuity in certain kinds of food items and the associated culinary cultures. Since Bengal actually was an agglomeration of certain subregions, which I mentioned before, it is natural that there would be subtle differences in the methods of cooking or in the methods of preparation of some common foods. In fact, in much later period, we have such texts like Barendra Randhan, which all talks about the cooking culinary speciality of the Barendra region, that is North Bengal. So there were some kind of differences, but the chief staple food consumed by the rich and the poor alike in their everyday life was rice. The regular diet of a poor villager is beautifully portrayed in a verse quoted by Kedaro Bhatto in the Brittoratnakaro, written about 1200 CE. It is said, Torunam Shorshopo Shakam, Novo Danani, Pichilani Cho, Dadhini, Alpa Vayana Sundari Gramya Jano Mishtam Ashnati. So, thus, a poor householder could satisfy his appetite eating boiled husk rice made from freshly new grown paddy, liquid curd, leaves of mustard seed plant. Such a frugal diet would cost him very little. Thus, even in the later part, we find in the 14th century Prakrita Poingalo, the common food was rice with ghee. Along with that, the standard accompaniments were a particular variety of small fish called morola and leaves of jute tree. Fortunate is the man whose wife serves him on a banana leaf some hot rice with ghee, morola fish, fried leaf of jute plant, and some hot milk. We still love morola hot rice with ghee, and of course, who doesn't like morola fish? So, in the same text, aspiration for preparing sweets can be noticed. When it says that if one could get a good quantity of clarified butter, that is ghee, then 20 round fried sweet cakes could be made, and possession of a little rock salt might make one feel like a king. Then again, we have like texts from the Brihadharma Purana, then Vishnu Purana, which talks about the eating sequence in North India, like meals should start with the sweet dish, followed by salty dishes, and end with spicy and bitter dishes. So this shows that this is a different kind of practice, because in Bengal it is not the same. So Brihadharma Purana, compiled within the territory of Bengal, prescribed that boiled rice and ghee should be consumed first, followed by spinach and rest of the vegetables, and the meal should end with milk with boiled rice. So sweet should not come first, which whereas in Vishnu Purana we have that we should start with the sweet dish. Sarvananda in Tika Sarvasya shows the passion and love of East Bengalis for shutki mach, that is dried fish. Among the spices, he said that morich, pepper, pippali, lavanga, long or clove, jirak, ela, that is elach actually, jafran, saffron, ada, adraka, korpuro, camphor, jaifal, nutmeg, hing were popular in Bengali cooking. So this actually continues. This we have this kind of evidence which continues even in the present times. Just to digress a little bit, though not for Bengal, but the description in the Noishodhya Charita of the bridal banquet on the occasion of Damayanti's marriage shows that royal guests were entertained by treating them with various kinds of cooked fish, many types of meat dishes, curry made of deer meat, and many kinds of sweet cakes, pishtoko, various kinds of sweet drinks, and betel. Thus, this lavishness of a royal feast stood in stark contrast to what the common man ate. We find that it is that Sarbanando in his commentary mentions the different types of fishes like rohito, modguro, that is maguro, shalo, shokula, which were common in early Bengal. It is interesting to note that though in general dried fish were not eaten, we have these references, and in Bangladesh we have shutki mach, that dried fish, which is referred to. But this was perhaps the trait of a coastal society. This is also another thing we have to take into consideration, because the inland society, the food habits of an inland society and the food habits of a coastal society will of course vary. And here I'd like to show you that in very early period, in the Pachmark coin from Wari Boteshwar, we have the representation of a lobster. So this is very unique. In other Pachmark coins, we don't have. So this is very unique to Wari Boteshwar region presently in Bangladesh, which shows the regional features which was coming in. Quickly, I will go through a little bit of the descriptions of early medieval texts in from other regions, which talks about different kinds of food. For example, in Yashastilaka Champu of Shomodeva, that is from in the Deccan, Karnataka, as consisting of white shining rice, broths of golden hue, and you can see this. In Bhavishya Shatakaha, 10th century, the menu of the royal feast starts with shali rice. And so you have different kinds of, I don't think I have much time, so I'll skip this. Which is very interesting is that we have a lot of, there are information about the different kinds of drink, but particularly this is a very interesting depiction of a description of a wine selling, which is found from the Chardapadas. So in the Chardapadas, among the different occupations, wine selling and the house of a female wild seller, Shundini, were vividly described. Inebriation was common, and so going to a wine seller's house could be a part of a daily evening soiree. What is striking is that these houses were earmarked with a symbol signifying that they were located within the general residential area. The symbols here perhaps guided the customer to the desired place. Doshami duarat chihno dekhaiya, aila garahok apone bahiya. This term grahok is also very interesting, the word. The Shundin is sitting with their 64 pots of wine to choose from. It is clearly stated that once you enter the household of a Shundini, you cannot come out of it. The use of the word Garahok, I found it is very interesting because it talks about consumer and it is related to urban life. Shodukta Karanamrito, if you look at the text, we find that sugar industry was an important industry, which is described here, where the image of rural Bengal being immersed in the fragrance of the sugarcane molasses and the rattling sound of the machine squeezing sugarcane juices are described. This is an image of the rural life of agriculturists with the hue of a particular season. Daily life of rural Bengal is also portrayed in the description of husking of rice with pestle, pounding of rice, drawing water from well, rural women singing while husking rice, and so on. So here we have Govardhanacharya's Arya Saptashati pronounced that a village woman should walk in a proper manner, and this how shows that the village, there was a contrast between the village and the urban milieu, and it was not always the village people did not look at the urban woman in already not always in very positively. So Govardhan Acharya's Arya Saptashati pronounced that a village woman should walk in a proper manner and not follow the flirtatious gaits of urbane women. In a village, this sort of flippant attitude is not looked upon properly by the village head. So daily life in cities and villages thus had contrastive characters. Buddhist texts and Sanskrit narrative texts regularly tend to privilege the everyday life in the cities over the quotidian experiences in rural life, which are occasionally lit up by non-elite rural literature and in terracotta sculpture. The latter two being embedded more to the folk culture than stone or bronze pieces, which generally was associated with the more formal aspects and upper echelons of the society. Therefore, in the stone sculptures or the bronze, we won't find depiction of the rural milieu. It is only in the terracottas, which is where we have some kind of idea. So this everyday life here, it is an inquiry on the life itself that were led both by the elite and the commoner. In understanding everydayness, and attention to small components is imperative, as Fernand Braudel has told us, and the most mundane and intimate aspects of people's ordinary lives also needed to be taken into consideration for a holistic study. So, what I did here today is, like, through examining the various sources, one can perhaps hear some voices of the everyday, while quite understandably there are other voices which remains unheard. Now, I finish with this particular uh, plaque, which is a beautiful plaque, and which why I found today, I haven't seen that before. I have no idea of its authenticity, because many of us know that it is said in, I found it in the net, and it is said that it is from Chandrakitugar. Many of us know that there has been a quite some questions regarding the authenticity of some terracotta objects from Chandrakitugar. I'm not sure whether this is prepared later on or this is fake, but I found it, if it is original, then this plaque is a very interesting, actually gives an interesting eye opener to the life, to the celebrations. And you can see that ladies carrying dishes with foodies and must be goodies, and you have people together, then there is another person. So it is a kind of a particular samaja kind of thing. There were lots of people, beautiful ladies mingling together, perhaps ready to eat, and so gives a very interesting facet of the urban milieu and the daily life, the celebration of a daily life through this plaque. But I don't know, I have to look for its authenticity. I'm not very sure about it. Thank you very much for giving me a patient hearing.
Thank you, madam. Uh, Here are some questions which I have already noted from our YouTube chat. First,
Yeah.
Antarip Mondal from Jadavpur University. How did the textual and visual culture represent the role of widows in Quotidian cuisine in Bengal, their own food habits regulated
Uh,
by the Niti Shastras?
Sorry, I didn't get it. Can I see the questions?
No,
Can
it
you
is.
okay? Can you just repeat, Prithwiraj?
Yes. How did the textual and visual culture
Right.
represent the role of widows in quotidian cuisine in Bengal to suit their own food habit regulated by Niti Shastras?
Okay. First of all, visual culture does not talk anything of the widows. That is very clear. Whatever little kind of visuals we have seen, we do not have any kind of evidence which can show that this is a different from the this is different from the general food partaking of the common people. So that we don't know. But of course, in the shastras we have depictions of what a widow has to eat for the daily life. But when you come to particularly to Bengal, you do not have specifically for Bengal. It is a general in Shastras, but these are normative texts. So we have a general kind of an injunction that widow should eat this and that. But visuals, no, we have no depiction in the visuals.
Ma'am, Shomita Majumdar asking, I would like to ask you about the reception of the representation of conjugal life and clandestine moments portrayed in Chandraketu God Plaque by the anonymous viewers of different ages.
The question is, this is the comment. What is the question?
she is asking about the reception of representation of conjugal life and clandestine moments portrayed in Chandrakitugar Plaque by the anonymous keepers of the community.
Oh, okay. I understood. She's talking about the reception, that how the people actually received received these things.
Right.
See, it is not possible for us to understand the reception per se, but when we think of that these were being continuously being produced and people, it is there in the depiction in the visual culture of Chandrakitugar. So definitely it reflected a part of the societal journey. So therefore, we have to see the Chandrakitugar visuals from the point of view of the fact that huge number of visuals are being were being produced. The plaques actually gave us an idea of what was going on there, and so therefore the common people there, whether they were very much a part of the entire thing. So whether like now we know that we write reviews, we go to a particular, suppose we go to a art show, or we go to a sculptural show and we write reviews, or we see whether this is good or not. But at that point of time, as I repeatedly mentioned, that we are very limited by our sources, and we do not have from Chandrakitugar or something like that, we do not have any evidence which could talk about receptions. For example, I'll give you one. When we talk of Northwestern India, in Northwestern India, suppose we had depictions of balconies, where there is one very interesting from their region, where there were two layers, and so in upper category we could see that people were sitting on the box kind of thing, and in lower category we could see that there were some gymnastics. It was a kind of we had wrestling event or sporting event going on. So we know that people were actually looking at those things. So this is how it was depicted. But here in Chandrakitugar, we don't find similar kind of thing. So they must be watching, they must have looked, but I cannot go beyond that because my sources do not talk beyond that. I think Vishnu has a question.
Sorry, I'm
Yeah.
interrupting. Gautam.
Yeah.
I think Professor Vishnupriya Bhatak has a question.
She has
can
a
we take
question,
it, please?
yes.
Then you can continue.
Sure.
I
I'm
can see her question.
I have Sucandra, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can see your question actually. I can read
Okay.
that.
Yeah. So this is principally my question about methodology. Okay.
Yeah,
like
right.
Initially when you started your work, I'm sure, like all of us, whether it's as an archaeologist or as an anthropologist or historian, any of us who deal with sources, primary sources. So when we start, we have some hypothesis in mind, or it's not a blank mind with which we start. Now we know that sources are sometimes selective on what they want to represent. Okay. Certain things are getting represented, certain things are getting retained, other things which may be as important to us now, but in the past, to the communities, to the people who were writing, it was not that important. Perceptions differ. So as a historian, so this is more a methodological question. What were your expectations? What do you think are the gaps in this reconstruction of Quotidian? And if you have any kind of any kind of observation and comment on the silence of the sources, where you feel that possibly the question of intentionality comes in.
Right. Thank you very much, Vishnu. There are three aspects to this question. Yes, it's very true that when I started off I was very skeptical that what kind of information, because we all started by reading, obviously, Brothers' Structure of Everyday Life, much related to the much later period where we have definite sources, we have a lot of concrete evidences and how the things were being reconstructed and all. So I was thinking that how much information do we get? And at the same time, when I was looking at the works of the earlier works, for example, Jenny Naboer's work or other, I found that these works when they're talking of daily life, it is actually they're talking about the coiffure or the dress or something like that. So individually one or thing, not integrating in the whole aspects at how should we look at the everyday life, the quotidian practices. And so I started sifting through the sources. One gap that I noticed was that in the epigraphical evidence, that the epigraphic, particularly from Bengal, I plan to go by region wise to enhance my studies. Particularly from Bengal, epigraphy is not very vocal. Whenever we have, like for economic history, we have so much of information, but here we find that epigraphy does not talk much about the everyday experiences. So naturally, there are some. So for example, in we have this Shena inscription which talks about how the village people were brought when they came to the town, how this is a very famous thing that the village people were actually being shown that what is, and they were showing it for what is a pearl. It is like the seed of a gourd, because they haven't seen a pearl. So these are one or two references that we find from epigraphy. So I had to cut down on looking for epigraphic sources. I didn't find. Then I moved into visuals. And there I found from my first entry point was in Bengal, Chandraketugarh. And there I found that there are some elements which can be brought in. Now, regarding the selection of sources, yes, this is a problem anybody who works with ancient India, that there are silences and there are selections. Now, in this case of working on the quotidian practices, I found that I cannot, I have no hand in what could be said about. So whatever is written, whatever is there, I can sift through those material only. And what I did not do here, and which I intend to do later on, was that, for example, only one example I showed, that methodologically whether the visuals that are being found, so whether we have, like in Gandhara, we had this kind of a toilet trays, which the representation of this we find from archaeological materials, and in literature and the textual materials, we know that people were using those trays, and it has been experimented also for beautifications and others. So here too, in their everyday life, what are the things that they were using? Suppose for decorating themselves. So here we have to juxtapose between the materials that we get and the visuals. So there was, this gap remains in particular this study. Moreover, in the reconstruction of the quotidian, therefore, initially I started with that whatever I'll be saying today, it is not a holistic account, it is fragmented. But I think that not speaking at all, because it is fragmented, it is better to speak whatever we have. And so therefore we cannot be very concrete about that this was the life that ancient Indians, so we cannot blanketly say that people in ancient Bengal lived like that. But when we have some information, for example, textual, that what were the food habits, so basic things we know that these were the kind of foods that were being eaten, which we find, and these texts are not normative texts, these are texts which give us an account of the life of the people, the village life of the people. So those sources I tried to follow. So the sources, I had to sift through the sources, and all kind of sources could not be taken into consideration. So there was this, definitely there was a great problem with the sources. And but so as my sir used to say, that you have to ask certain questions to your sources. Kano kobe kothay, so what, how did it, whether we can agree to this points, and then I have tried to gather the sources. But yes, visuals, when we look at the visuals, there are always, it is, sources are very selective, and they actually represent one kind of mindset. And so there will be, always there will be a gap. And I don't think anybody can actually, that gap can be managed, because we don't have everything that we need to know to reconstruct the everyday life of a particular region or a particular time.
Thank you, madam. There were 4 or 5 more questions. Prithwiraj, can I take?
Yeah.
Gautam, sure, continue.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Rituparna Roy Chaudhary She is asking, do we have any information about games played by the children?
uh, Children games, yes, we have lot of, if we look at the archaeological materials, we have lot of rattles, toy carts and other things. So these are for the children. So archaeology provides the lot of material culture provides a lot of evidence for the children games and sports.
Okay. Bikram Mukherjee, his question is, Manasulla Someshwara talks about Bharashram. Do you think that physical fitness was given much importance and it shaped the alpha masculinity in that period?
Yes, physical fitness was very important, and therefore I mentioned this the Ratha copper plate, Koilan copper plate, where it is said that when he becomes a king has to be trained in wrestling and other things. So physical fitness always was given priority, and not only in Manushala, if we look at very early period, we have, and not only in Northwest, when we look at the life of a Nagaraka also, there are also different kinds of like wrestling and others. These are the krida. These are the kridas that were a part of the life of a people. So physical, and for a king, it is definitely, it's very important. And as for example, Kharavala's inscription much earlier, there also the what are the things in his train. So there we have that his physicality, it becomes very important in the description. So always in inscriptions we have the physicality described in for the rulers.
Okay. Devasri Day, she is asking, when you spoke about the everyday rituals, you have mentioned only the sacrifices, whereas women played the most crucial part in conducting daily rituals. Have you ever come across any sources on this?
uh, I talked about the everyday lectures because I was limiting myself to the Grijya Sutra, and where you have this is a part of our everyday like existence. So there, so it was I focused on that. But by other rituals, what you are actually meaning by like cooking and others or things, or the rituals which are related to philosophical or the religious rituals? Are you talking about the religious rituals? I have to get that clarified so that I can answer you better. Is she talking about
Okay.
the religious rituals of the women?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes, yes.
In the religious rituals. So religious rituals we have in the normative texts. We all have that what are the different kinds of rituals. But in the if we concentrate on Bengal, then we do not have. We have of course later in the Brihadharma Purana and the other Puranas from Bengal. For example, Broto. Kunal Chakraborty has shown how broto as a religious ritual becomes a very important part of the everyday existence of the woman folk, the different kinds of brotos. So this was, of course, there in later period in 11th, 12th century.
Ratul Bhor, he is asking, ma'am, is there any kind of special religious festival observed, especially in Chandraketugad?
No, I have not come across any religious festival. Those festivals which I mentioned are Chandrakatugad has depiction of harvest festival, but like Komodi Mohotshoba and other, there are Indra Utshab and others. They have a religious bent of my thing because it talks about the Indra, the Lord Indra and others. But these are also related to the harvesting seasons, and this is not particular for Bengal. This is for the entire the North India in particular.
Treya Dotto, this is actually from my side the last question which I have got. Kama Sutra suggests prostitution to be an integral part of urban pleasure. What was the position of public women or prostitutes in early Bengal? Did they enjoy certain social rights or social respect?
Our sources from early Bengal, do not specifically, we do not have any text like Kama Sutra, which talks about the Gonikas, like which talks about the Nagaraka or the Gonikas. But interestingly, when we look at the Chandrakitagore plaques, we find that the things, for example, the group sex that are being depicted, or the sexual unions, the Moithuna, which these plaques are referred to as Moithuna plaques, we find that this is earlier than the Kama Sutra. So this kind of tradition of sexuality was very much there. But the regarding Gonika, that how a Gonika featured in everyday life of Bengal, that we do not know. But my point is that when Kana Sutra talks about, it gives an it's in an urban milieu, and when it talks about the Nagaraka and the Gonika, and Bengal was not very far from North India, so it is therefore I brought in Pataliputra also. Therefore, it is quite possible that here in Bengal during that period we had, and it is quite evident also that we had presence of Gonikas and Nagarakas, the elites. Who are the Nagarakas? The elites. So the man about town must have been here also, that, or for whom do we have different kinds of depictions, that the kind of things that we see. So the enjoyment, the pleasure was definitely there, and so now the Gonikas had to be there. But I don't have a particular source to talk about that. This source talks about Gonika, that I don't have.
Thank you, madam. From my side, I have collected all these questions, and it is already answered by you. And Prithwiraj, I think Professor Nurmahammad Sekh is with us for a Thanksgiving note. Please.
Actually, I just a point which I want to make, that this is when we talk of social history, we are talking about, there are many genres of social history. Like popular culture is also another genre. So when we talk of everyday life, so it becomes very difficult for a researcher to get things to take together. But at the same time, if one looks at the sources and a keen reading of the sources, I think one can actually reconstruct partially, even though partially, some kind of picture that will give us a better understanding of social history.
Absolutely, Sucandra. Actually, I was fascinated by your lecture, particularly because I'm interested, in consumer culture, though of a later
consumption is very much part of the.
Exactly. I was actually thinking of whether to ask you this. What kind of, the consumer culture is reflected in, because you see a lot of the goods, materials, and all, and commodities feature in these visual, these texts.
The consumerism, like as we understand now, I can't say this. We cannot, like the present consumerism.
Very interesting, the signages and all. You spoke of, a wine cellar or something, and signages pointing out where.
Yeah.
These are interesting.
There I found very interesting the use of the word grahak, because grahak is in Bangla also. If you look at grahak, actually talks about urbanity, talks about a kind of you are a consumer of something. Right. So I think when we look at things, it is not very proper to connect it with always with consumer, like the present consumerism. But as they say that consumption is there, of course, when we talk about daily objects and things, so there has to be when objects are being transshipped, for example, trade, exchanges. So there is a point of departure, there is a destination. So that destination has to have some demand for these objects, for these products. So it is consumption. So there is a kind of, but when we talk about the consumption culture, then we have a different kind of things. There are many other things that we have to keep into mind. For example, in Roman history, we have a lot of work been done on early Roman trade relations and the culture of consumption, where we have why paper was so much consumed, why there is wine, and what kind of thing. So this needs a deeper understanding and deeper study. The culture of consumption is a very complex thing, but consumer is of course there. Like people are buying, otherwise why should they?
Of course. Thank you so much. Gautam, I mean, there's a, I don't know,
actually,
just, I don't know whether, I mean, Sucandra will take it.
Sorry?
Amitandu Biswas, he writes, ধুনুচির ব্যবহার গোটা ভারতে কেবল পূর্ব ভারতেই পুজো সংস্কৃতির এক বিশেষ অঙ্গ হিসেবে দেখা যায়, যেমন ধুনুচি আরতি। বাংলার সংস্কৃতির ক্ষেত্রে ধুনুচি ব্যবহার বাংলা সংস্কৃতির দিক থেকে কতটা প্রাচীন এবং নিজস্ব? দিস ইজ হিজ কোয়েশ্চেন।
Well, ঠিক ধুনুচি হিসেবে ছিল কিনা, whether it was in the form of ধুনুচি, but we have, I think Vishnupriya will be able to also highlight on this. We have from the archaeological materials different kinds, like pot on stand, dish on stand or something like that, which is similar to dhunuchi. But I cannot say that these were dhunuchis which are being used for puja. So that I have no idea whether the dish on stand things which looks like dhunuchi but can be said dhunuchi. So I don't think these are dhunuchi. So I cannot answer. I don't think, not at all. So dhunuchi culture, I have no idea from how prachin it is.
Okay. Okay, Gautam, if there are no questions, can we invite Noor?
Actually, there are so many questions. There were the questions from we failed to connect Professor Nurmahammad. So on behalf of the department, on behalf of our institution, I would like to thank you all, especially the speakers, today's speaker, Professor Sucandra Ghosh, and tomorrow, Professor Vishnupriya Bashak. She will speak tomorrow. And there are so many queries by the listeners. I would like to say that there will be another joining link for tomorrow's lecture. Please keep patience. We shall forward it to your registered email ID, and after completion of tomorrow's lecture, you will get a feedback form, and after submission of your feedback, you will get the certificate. And from our institution, especially from our department, faculty members, I would like to thank all of you, the listeners, the YouTube channel, for doing the whole operation simultaneously and taking all the responsibilities. And also thank you all. And I would like to thank especially our principal and vice principal for giving their continuous support. Thank you all. Thank you again. And
thank you very much. Thank you, Gautam. Thank you, Prithwiraj.
Thank you, Sucandra and Vishnupriya. I'll see Vishnupriya tomorrow.
Yeah, see you.
Thank you very much.